Hello and welcome to Conversations in Cleantech, the podcast that celebrates the clean tech industry and the people that power it. Brought to you by Brightsmith. We're your hosts. I'm Jenny Gladman.
And I'm Ben Sparks. And in this 5th season, we're interviewing leaders, forward thinkers and entrepreneurs from around the world to talk all things clean tech and clean tech careers.
From the opportunities and challenges of working in clean tech, to tips to get into the industry, and why it's so rewarding to work in. We'll be hearing from a series of individuals, all with very different backgrounds, to discover how they forged their clean tech career and are fueling a cleaner, greener future. In addition, they'll be offering you some tokens of wisdom to enlighten, engage, and inspire everyone to live their purpose every single day. So in this series, we are talking about careers and careers that are part of the world driving the energy transition. And today I have not one, but two brilliant guests with me. They've both had very different careers, but they've ended up in the same place. So they both work for BeZero Carbon. It's a global rating agency for the voluntary carbon market, and their ratings allow market participants to price and manage risk. So I had my intro planned, and then one of the lovely ladies this morning let me know she'd moved jobs, but it's actually very fitting for this career. So first up is Louisa O'Connell. She was the head of net zero research until last week, but she is now working as a sales specialist alongside our other guest, Sirine Hanaf, who is the head of partnerships. A little bit more background on them. So Sirine has a brilliantly multicultural background. She's got experience from all over the globe, and this has enabled her to see business in a truly global way. It's a huge asset to her role as the head of partnerships, connecting with and building relationships with project developers across the globe. Louisa, who my script here still says the head of research, but no longer the head of research, has had also a really interesting career. Before BeZero, she was at EcoAct Consulting, a multinational company on carbon accounting and climate risk and strategy. She's worked with companies such as ITV and Reckitt to set ambitious science-based targets and also net zero targets. So very different, but now fighting the same battle. So ladies, welcome to Conversations in Clean Tech. And over to you to tell our listeners a little bit more about yourselves.
Well, great. Thank you, Jenny. Thanks for having us. I'm very excited to be able to chat with you today and, have the opportunity to share about our professional experience and, how it led us to what we're doing today. So as you mentioned, I'm the head of partnership for BeZero, which is a pioneer in the rating space for the VCM. But as you can imagine, my personal journey to get to do what I'm doing today was not straightforward. 10 years ago, when I graduated from university, this type of businesses didn't really exist. So I hope that this podcast will inspire people and, show that the first job or career you decide to take on doesn't necessarily have to define the rest of it. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sirine. And Louisa?
Yeah, as Sirine said, it's great to be here today. I guess in contrast to Sirine, I've come from a slightly more linear background in terms of the work that I've been doing since I finished uni. And pretty much straight away jumped into a career in sustainability. But even in that time, I've seen huge changes in the industry. And again, there was no job like a job at BeZero when I joined or when I started my career. So it's been a very, very interesting journey.
Amazing. Thanks, ladies. And I think before we go into more on careers, something that I'd really like to touch on is more around the carbon market itself. And I think not only do a lot of people not understand it, it's also quite a controversial topic in that some people have a lot more belief in its ability to have an impact than others. So I'm going to go to Louisa on this first one, but just for those of our listeners that are not as familiar with the carbon markets, can you give the 101, the what does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So, what we do at BeZero is focus mainly on the voluntary carbon market. There are two carbon markets, really, the compliance market. That's the one which is more focused on high emitting, high intensity industries. And that there are schemes, for example, the emissions trading scheme in the EU, which is for those high intensity companies to essentially sort of pay for the emissions that above and beyond their thresholds that they emit. What we're looking at is the voluntary carbon market. And the voluntary carbon market is in the simplest way, it is a voluntary scheme for companies who are emitting to offset their emissions. What I guess that has the connotations that companies are just buying these carbon credits to do whatever they're doing now. However, as time has developed and as schemes have really changed over the last few years, a voluntary carbon market and carbon credits are more and more often used as part of a company's net zero pathway and net zero strategy. So it's not the case that companies are just emitting the same amount of carbon year on year on year and then offsetting the same amount year on year on year, but that this is now incorporated into a really robust decarbonisation pathway, coupled with the purchase of carbon credits to compensate for their emissions as they reach net zero. I'll leave it to Sirine to talk about the sort of upstream part of the VCM and the projects themselves.
Yeah, of course. Following up on the 101 segment of, what is a carbon credit. And obviously, BeZero Carbon is a rating agency for carbon credits. So first we need to understand what is a carbon credit, and that represents a ton of CO2 that has been removed from the atmosphere or has been avoided to be emitted, right? And those can be generated by either avoidance project or removal project. So avoidance project would be projects such as renewable energy projects, which essentially replace the use of carbon-intensive source of energy, such as oil or coal, by cleaner energy sources. Or avoidance project would be avoided deforestation projects, for example. So that can either be from unplanned or planned deforestation. So, for example, if a landowner had planned to deforest their land for timber productions, for example, they can be incentivized to cancel those plans and protect the lands if they were to receive an alternative revenue. And in that case, that alternative revenue would have been generated from the sale of the carbon credits. So like most of the projects that are seeking to generate those revenues from those conservation activities, for example, have to go through an accreditation process, which makes sure that a minimum level of quality is being adhered to, bearing in mind that every standard might have a different entry-level bar in terms of data disclosure needed by the project, but also like the test required to assess a project additionality. So, for example, whether the project actually needs carbon financing in order to operate, or like they might have different bars to assess the baseline accuracy. So how was the business as usual emission scenario modeled, for example? And so like those certification models led like the market to look at all projects from a binary lens, where accredited projects were assumed to deliver the same outcome, regardless of like the multiple ways a project could actually implement a methodology on the ground. So, what we offer at BeZero is our opinion on the likelihood that the credits generated by a project actually does deliver a ton of CO2. And this is done through our rating framework, which assesses like multiple risk factors. So we look at additionality, as I mentioned, but we also look at overcrediting, leakage, non-permanence, policy risks, etc. So that's our 101 section on carbon credits.
Thank you. And I think it's one of those things, it is complex, but the more that it becomes mainstream, I think the more people's understanding will grow. And I guess the other question that a lot of people have is, to what extent does the carbon market play a part in mitigating climate change? And I think on this podcast, generally, we have this discussion around lots of different areas. And I think all of our guests hopefully are kind of bright enough to realize there's no one solution. So it's about lots of different solutions working in parallel. But how do you see the carbon market and the changes in that having an impact?
It's a really good question. Sorry, Sirine.
Yeah, I mean, so I understand the concerns, right? Because like the market has been booming, and like serious capital is being invested into those climate solutions. For as Louisa mentioned, like companies that could not reduce further, like have to go to that market, and so understandably, like this market has to go under more scrutiny. And like the whole concept of carbon credit is being questioned, and like that's where like BeZero comes in, and we hope that like rating agencies will help investors navigate that complex market, provide them like with a uniformed metric to be able to compare projects across sectors, across countries, across standards, but also like provide that infrastructure that is currently lacking, to be able to look at carbon credit as a commodity and enable like risk professionals to actually manage that risk properly. And like coming from a market risk background, like the dream scenario for me is like would be that for carbon credits to be grouped by grades, like the same way, like for example, oil at the moment, they are currently grouped by grades based on the composition of sulfur, etc. Understandably, like carbon projects are all very different, but I think that we found a good way to be able to classify like project based on their quality, and that's how we hope that we can bring solution to that market and help scale it, and not be a victim of like those headlines that are, might bring the market to things that the whole market is flawed, which is, I don't think that's the case, right? I mean, we've rated 286 projects or so, and out of those, like only 14% are actually getting the lowest grade of the scale. So you do have large distribution of quality. So yeah, that's my take on this.
And like you say, Jenny, that we're not saying that the voluntary carbon market should be the only tool in the toolbox. And what I'm seeing with a lot of corporates is that they are incorporating this into a very detailed transition plan, which is looking first and foremost at their own operations and at their own decarbonisation pathway. But if there's another tool out there that can help to accelerate that decarbonisation pathway globally, as long as it's done right, why wouldn't you do that? I think the conversation is really changing to be much more about doing, your own decarbonisation coupled with compensation through the voluntary carbon market, to do everything that you can do rather than just trying to focus on one area or focus on another. And I think historically, a lot of frameworks, a lot of guidance has been around, let's not use the voluntary carbon market because it's not credible or there's not enough integrity in the market. But even frameworks like the SBTI are now increasing their guidance, increasing their understanding and what's the word I'm looking for, kind of instruction on how to use the voluntary carbon market credibly. And I think that's really, really going to help to give much more trust in using it. And having a sort of an arsenal of tools to get to global decarbonisation.
And I like one of the words that you picked on there is trust. And I think actually that's probably one of the main topics that comes up when you think about the carbon market, and particularly the corporates. And I think we have an interesting take on it sitting in the middle of all of these companies, that you start to see changes in perception. And I think something that I've seen even in the last kind of 5 years is the difference of a lot of corporates doing the tick box exercise and having one individual who's responsible for ESG, like sat in a little desk in the corner, sort of trying to do their piece, to actually it being embedded in companies and trying to make sure that the practices are spread across every individual, rather than it being one department who's, fighting a losing battle in most cases, and potentially buying carbon credits to tick a box so that they can, say to their shareholders or their investors, oh yeah, we're doing something that's going in the right direction. I think we're now seeing where people are starting to have this belief that it is everyone's problem and not one person's problem, and we all need to get behind it. And I think that word trust is so pertinent, because what you're doing at BeZero is actually giving that transparency on a market which has been pretty impossible for people to get their head around until this point.
Yeah, I think one of the fastest I ever saw the industry move was really when the TCFD framework became much more a part of corporate reporting, and a lot of the climate reporting suddenly moved from a small isolated climate team who probably had very little influence on the wider company to being moved to the CFO's problem. And suddenly there was a lot more interest and a lot more action being taken. And yeah, as you say, that it started to be everyone's problem and everyone's responsibility to actually do something on that.
I think it's a generational thing to an extent as well, in that every year you bring in a fresh, cohort of interns or graduates or school leavers who have a different outlook on this. It really pushes the agenda from the bottom up as well, which I think we don't see with most things in companies. Most companies are a top-down strategy, whereas I think when it comes to this, it really is the voices at the bottom are often the loudest. Anyway, that brings us into early careers, and that's kind of where we want to focus today's discussion, is actually showing that regardless of where you start out, and I think Sirine touched in this in her intro, it doesn't matter what your first job is. It's more about kind of the impact you have through your whole career. And we no longer live in a world where people work for one company for their whole life, or very, very few people do in most parts of the world. And now when I was doing my research for the podcast, which I like to do sneaky research on people that are coming on the show, I found a great fact out that Sirine's first job was actually at Disney World. And I didn't realize it was a summer job, but I feel like all jobs shape part of who you are and what you become, and also why you chose to do it. So Sirine, over to you to tell us a bit more about Disney.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so my early career. So I first started I joined the business school, and as part of the program, we had to do for the first year 3 months internship, the second year 6 months internship. So for the 3 months internship, they were quite open in what we were choosing to do, right? And so there was this college program at Disney World, which was ultimately us working at the park, but also getting business classes and having, access to the leadership team at Disney World. So it was great, right? I mean, I was sharing a flat with like people from all over the world, like, it was my first work experience ever. So it was just a fun thing to do. But, after the second year at university, then I had to pick a 6 months internship. Well, this one, I decided to do something that was a bit more corporate focus. And I ended up working for 6 months in a green focused marketing agency in Australia. And with hindsight, I now found this very interesting, because I can now appreciate the shift that that happened in the market, because in companies' mindset. Because I used to work with clients, and I think you did mention that, Jenny, where companies like climate related issues were really seen as like a marketing opportunity only, whereas now we are seeing carbon costs being included into a company's balance sheet. Obviously, from what Louisa mentioned earlier, you have those companies that are part of like a regulated sectors, and they have to they have been assigned a cap on how much they can emit, and then anything that is emitted in excess, then they either have to buy EUAs into the market, or they have to pay a tax on it, right? So that automatically goes into the balance sheet. But now we are seeing like that shift where even companies that are not part of the regulated sectors, they're starting to see climate related issues not only as a marketing opportunity, but they see that as a liability. So that was basically my extent during my study. That was my extent to of exposure to the carbon market. So it was really close to zero. And then after that, I just ended up graduating with a business degree, focus major in real estate investment. So really not destining me to the career in climate tech, but it was a fun journey.
And actually, one of the things I always like to ask people who have got a lot of experience of working in different countries is how that experience shaped you, the exposure to different cultures, and your list is vast, and your kind of exposure to lots of different roles, different countries, different continents. How has that shaped you into the person that you are?
Well, I think I was very lucky in life because I'm originally from Morocco. But born in France, studied in between France and the US, worked in the UK, and obviously I had those internships in Australia, etc. So, first of all, I think like the first thing that I got from there is obviously languages, right? Being able to speak multiple languages is always like something beneficial, because now we are working in a world where, unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, but a lot of the time when I engage with project developer, a lot of them are based in Latin America. I wish I could speak Spanish, but I think that's just, I think, like when you're engaging with people and they see that you understand their culture, etc. I think just like getting the first touch communication is very easy, because you should be able, obviously we are all working and in the climate space, but like that human touch is something that might make or break like even like a professional relationship. So that was something for me that was very helpful. I mean, when I first, like, my first real job, like after university, coming in London, was for a Kuwaiti oil company. So having, which helped me really build like thick skin, having to work with a completely different culture, even though I'm from, like, I'm Arab, but like I think the Middle Eastern culture is very, very difficult to deal with, and that's something that very early on like built my tough skin. And then after going into like trading houses where you have to deal with very difficult type of personalities, where people are stressed, P&L driven. So and then after going into, then later on working at BeZero, which is a bit more, I think people are a bit less suffer, because like that's a new industry, we are all learning. So I think people are a bit less like less difficult, because we are all learning, right? Even though you might find, or you might end up discussing with people that are market veteran, has been in the market for 20 years, but in reality, the market of 20 years ago is not the same market that it is today, right? So you could just have been starting engaging in that market a year ago, and I think that you would probably be as well educated as other people. So yeah.
Amazing. And to go over to Louisa, and a different question, and something we were discussing recently over lunch, which BeZero have amazing lunches for anyone that's interested in working there. Just a little plug for you. We were talking about Louisa's background in neuroscience, and I don't know, I'd hedged my bets that you're probably one of the few people that were in neuroscience from an academic perspective and are working working in the voluntary carbon market. I may be wrong, but yeah, over to you. I'd love for you to tell the same story that you told us about kind of your decision-making process and where that went.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess we'll have to go and do a poll of how many people in the VCM are working in neuroscience and or did neuroscience as a degree. And I wonder, I don't know if there's anything that I'm using now from that degree, but maybe there's more than I think there is. So anyway, as I said, I was doing my undergrad degree at Edinburgh University in neuroscience. And my final year, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next, but I'd been working with a really, really amazing supervisor on my dissertation and was really inspired by neuroscience and thought that might be a good thing to do for my master's. So applied for a master's at UCL in neuroscience and was all set to go there until over the summer, as a lot of stories go, went traveling. And as I was probably lying on a beach in Mexico somewhere, I was just thinking about what I really wanted to do and what my passions were. And I realized that it wasn't probably sitting in a lab looking at, very, very small electrical signals and brain samples. As amazing as I think that is, it's maybe not where my passions were. So I started thinking about what I really cared about. And the summer before, I had gone to Honduras to go and do a conservation project in the jungle in Honduras, which at the time seemed great. It was in one of the most dangerous parts of Honduras, which is, slightly interesting looking back. But it was just one of the coolest things I've ever done. I really, really loved just talking to people who were so passionate about conservation, really understanding what it looked like to do that sort of work, and really got me thinking about what I was interested in. So I actually went back to UCL and asked if I could transfer my master's program to conservation, and luckily they said yes. So I moved my master's program to the School of Geography and did my master's in that, at which point I started coming across climate consultancies, which then led me to my first job, which was at EcoAct. So could have been a very, very different future for me if it hadn't been for that trip to Mexico.
I think a lesson for everyone out there: go traveling. Always,
definitely.
Always go traveling. If in doubt, go traveling. I think it's where loads of people make amazing decisions, because it's that moment when actually you can disconnect from everything, and it often takes a while to do. I don't know how you both feel, but I think you can go on holiday for a week and I don't think you really switch your brain off. Whereas if you go away for an extended period of time, I think normally about the third week and you think, oh, I haven't looked at my emails, or I haven't, you all of a sudden you just feel totally disconnected, and it actually gives you the space to think and to maybe feel some of the things that you don't get a chance to feel in day-to-day life.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. And I think it's something that probably HR departments have noticed, right? Because in all of my previous jobs, we had a week, we had at least 1 week that we needed to take in consecutively, rather than just one day here and there. So because a lot of people were just ending up taking long weekends, but that's not enough, right? You need more than 3 days to disconnect, as you mentioned, at least a week. So.
Yeah, and I also think it's something where people are considering sabbaticals as well. And it's something that always seemed a bit crazy to me when companies wouldn't do it, because it's often actually the reason that people end up leaving is because they need a break. And if you won't give somebody a break, they will just take an opportunity to move jobs to get that break. And I'm not saying that people should be doing it necessarily in their first year, but if you've worked for an organization for 5 years, and you want to stay, but you actually do need a bit of breathing space first, I think it's a really great thing to do.
Yeah, I took a 7-month sabbatical from my last job, and it was definitely the best thing I've ever done. I was almost ready to quit and go and do something else. And when I was offered the opportunity for the sabbatical, went away for 7 months, came back, and I was there for, I think it was about 4 or 5 years afterwards. So it clearly had a good impact in the end.
Yeah, I did a similar thing, and I think it gives you that kind of just a chance to refresh the brain. Anyway, we've gone totally off topic, as often happens on the podcast. So one of the things actually I wanted to ask you, Louisa, as well, was we talked as well about the year that you started your career in 2015 and lots of interesting things that were happening. And perhaps it was one of those where fate makes lots of things collide. But how did that impact your career? And then how has that kind of brought you through to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's, well, a bit of a cheesy story, but I guess I started my career at the time when climate change was really being put on the agenda. So 2015 was the year the Paris Agreement happened and COP21 happened. So I started work, I think it was the beginning of that year. By the end of the year, the entire sort of climate industry had changed pretty significantly. In that year, science-based targets had gone from not existing at all to being talked about, people asking, how do we do them? What are we going to do to set them? And so I very quickly started thinking, okay, what's EcoAct going to do to start setting science-based targets, and how can we do that for our clients? And yeah, I started setting science-based targets very, very early on. Probably at the time, we were just trial and error, trying to figure out how to do them. The process is definitely a lot easier now than it was back then, but it was a huge learning experience for me. And yeah, we were lucky that we had a few clients who were trying to do this at this very, very early stage and who'd let us trial and error a bit on them, use them as guinea pigs for something which, eventually has become just an integral part of all companies' strategies now. So yeah, very, very interesting start to my career. And I think that, just the change that I've seen over that time from 2015 to where we are now is amazing. Yeah.
And speaking of change, I think it's pertinent to talk about startup life. And it isn't for everyone, but it's always an interesting topic because as we said with today, in the very short space of time since I wrote out my mind map of what we would talk about today and actually recording it, your job has changed, Louisa. And I think this happens so often. And we sat in your office talking about how small the company was and how actually almost everybody has a different job title because there's so many things to do. It's kind of impossible to define. So I guess, Sirine, I'd be interested in your take first, actually, because you've had a lot of big corporate background and now come into a startup. Like, how did that feel, that transition?
Yeah. I mean, to provide some background, it's true that I worked in a lot of big corporation. I started my career in an aviation company based in Seattle. And then quickly after that, moved into the energy space where I started with the Coity oil company. And then from there, I joined one of the major French integrated energy companies, so Total, then Trailstone, and then BP. And I mean, those are huge corporations, but I think for someone who's starting their career, for me, that was the perfect way to start my career because I was able to really learn from a company that already had their processes in place, already had their things figured out. The market was mature. The first 4 years of my career, I was focused on the European gas and power market, which was a mature market, but also I did have some exposure to the compliance market because we were working with power plants, which are part of those regulated entities part on the European emission trading scheme. So that was a great, that's how I started, getting into the carbon market. And then I had the opportunity to join BP covering their low carbon trading desk, still in a risk management capacity. But in that one, I had the opportunity to start covering not only regulated products, but also unregulated products. So the carbon credits that are part of the voluntary carbon market. And while I entered BP, I thought it was that prepared me quite well for like the jump to BeZero Carbon, because the carbon team at BP at the time, like 4 years ago when I joined them, was very small. So actually, when I decided to leave the company and join BeZero, like one of my ex-colleagues jokingly asked me, was like, but why are you leaving BP for a startup? Like, you are kind of working in a startup within BP, but you do have the financial stability of a big corporation, but still working in a very small team. And also the fact that, like operating in the VCM, which is like not a mature market, it was kind of the Wild West as well, right? Anyone working, whether you work for Shell, BP, or BeZero Carbon, we are all working in that very new market. So you still had, my job as a market risk specialist was very abstract, right? We didn't have like historical data to look at. We didn't have there was no price discovery. So it was very. So when I came across BeZero, the rating framework existed, but was not like BeZero Carbon was not a rating agency, officially a rating agency yet, right? But I could see the potential that, like this, the solution that this rating framework could unlock for the whole market. So I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. Why not? And then when I started to speak to the two co-founders, I think they really just sold me the the idea, and I decided to jump the ship. I think it was it was challenging, obviously, because before I used to know exactly what I would be going back to in the morning. In my previous jobs, we had like processes in place, etc. But here, that's definitely not the case. As you mentioned, I think even like before I joined BeZero, I had like maybe 2 or 3 different titles before we landed to that head of partnership title. And one of the things that I probably, I need to understand that, I might be giving myself a target for the year, but that's going to be a moving target. It's never going to stay the same. So yeah, I think the transition, I thought that I was prepared because of me being part of a very small team at BP, but I was not prepared. But that's the joy of being part of that market. So no, I enjoyed it.
Good. And Louisa, what about you? How do you find that startup life and the constant change?
Yeah, well, as you've mentioned, I've had, I think it's maybe 3 or 4 job titles since starting at BeZero, and I really enjoy the fact that there's a lot changing. I think it really reflects what's happening in the market. The voluntary carbon market is moving so fast; it's really, really growing, and I feel that BeZero Carbon is learning and growing with that. I also think that compared with my previous job, where everyone really had similar backgrounds, similar ways of thinking about sustainability, carbon and climate, at BeZero, everyone is from hugely different backgrounds. We've got Sirine, who's got a massively different background to me, but potentially probably more similar than some of the other our other colleagues who worked in finance for their entire lives and now working at BeZero. There's also the scientists in the ratings team who have all come from very academic backgrounds, looking at soil carbon, for example, or something like that. So I think what's really exciting is that ability to move very quickly and that ability to really bring so many different experts together to create something that's completely new for this market and for this industry.
I think it's always nice when you've worked in a corporate to realize that you can bring a discussion to the table and make a decision on the same day.
Yeah, definitely.
It feels a bit revolutionary and all of a sudden you take it for granted. But at the start, you're like, wow, we don't actually have to go through a chain of command. We just get the 5 people we need in a room, make the decision,
I think
and then...
My experience working in consultancy as well, just the companies that I was working with were incredibly slow moving, but even they have learned that they really need to be moving much, much, much faster on this and being much more reactive. So in a way, I think the corporates are kind of echoing the startups now, especially in this area.
And sort of going from that and talking about challenges. So I'd be interested to hear your view on looking forward, what the main challenges that you think the voluntary carbon market is going to face. What could be the stumbling blocks?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I think that despite the fact that there was an impressive amount lately of criticism made against carbon projects and their validity, as Louisa mentioned, like those climate solutions are still required, right, to enable us to reach our global net zero targets. So I do believe that like rating agency will just be critical in that journey to keep money flowing into that market, and even more if we want to bring institutional money into that market, which currently is not happening. Right, we have small investors are investing, but the big financial institution might not be the ones like still like putting big money into the table. But in the next couple of years, I think our focus will like certainly just be to continue like building our reputation, make sure that we become the partner of choice for like everyone in the VCM supply chain, so that that they manage to perform due diligence on project, but beyond that, like build like other set of tools that can help help people like designing project. And like we already like started some initiative where like we launched a public consultation on a carbon accounting template, in an effort to standardize the way projects are reporting their carbon accounting data. And we'll be bringing more initiative into the market, so to help that market not die by, keep on, building into the momentum. Like the past 2 years was huge for the voluntary carbon market. Like we reached like highs in terms of transactions, and like people are forecasting the market to reach a valuation of 200 billion to $200 billion by 2030, which is actually what 7 years from now. So I know like it sounds like a crazy number, but I think if people are forecasting that, it's just that we don't have other ways to get to that net zero quickly. So besides, if you were to cut the solution, so yeah, so I think I see a bright future for that market. We just need to keep building on our momentum.
Yeah, echoing what Sirine said, the challenge definitely isn't over yet. I think there is a huge hurdle to overcome to really get companies in particular to start thinking about the voluntary carbon market as one of the tools that they can use, and that is really, really going to come from improving the integrity and the trust in the market. What we're here for is really building that infrastructure and really helping to involve people in the decision-making process. I think for a really long time, companies have either said, nope, we're not going to buy any carbon credits at all, or yeah, we'll buy carbon credits and we'll do kind of basic due diligence on those credits. Now companies are actually really getting involved in the process and are starting to think, what do I really need to know to buy a good quality carbon credit, and what decisions do I need to make? So that the BeZero Carbon platform is so much more than just that letter rating. On the platform, we've got all of the information about the projects, which may be too in depth for some people, but if they want to find that information, it's all there. There's an amazing team here of Earth observation scientists who are busy putting together these incredible maps of all of the projects, the boundaries, looking at the fire and drought risk of those projects, which is maybe again something that doesn't need to be sort of looked at in that much detail. But if you want to look at it, and looking at the sort of the headlines of that information is going to be what companies can go to make those really informed decisions. And I think there's going to be a real shift in looking at buying credits more strategically. So using credits as a price on carbon, so that companies are actually driving decarbonisation from in their own value chain through the purchase of carbon credits. I think that you'll start to see more carbon credits being purchased within the industries that are hard to abate. So, buying credits within the transportation industry for a company who has a lot of emissions in logistics, for example. And, also looking to the future to looking for carbon removal credits and really trying to help to build the capacity within carbon removal technologies now, so that the supply is there for later when the demand needs to be met.
Yeah.
Wow.
Louisa, on what you said about buyers becoming more sophisticated, etc. And I think that's something that even like developers, they are starting to understand. Because like I'm hearing about actors in the market actually now thinking of building teams that would have for sole focus to engage with rating agencies and like institutional investors to ensure that the data they need to perform the due diligence are made public, which would be great. Like it's basically similar to like an investor relationship department, but like within project developer. So that's great that like buyers are becoming more sophisticated, and that's pushing the supply side, so developer to really act to be able to reach the new level, like the new thresholds that are being set. So that's amazing.
And I think that it kind of comes full circle to that discussion we had on the transparency and trust. And I think that the greater the transparency, even if you don't choose to read the whole report, sometimes knowing it's there just gives that extra bit of trust, because you can if you choose to. And I think that's something that we'll see is required to actually get trust in the market and to get more of a view globally, rather than it being small pockets of the world who are doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
And this brings us to the final question, and something we always do at the end is advice, and it can be advice to your younger self, but perhaps in this case, advice to people who want to enter the carbon market from a career perspective would be nice, because we've talked about all of these things that need to be done. They're pretty complex. There is not enough people working in the space right now for us to achieve what we need to achieve. So what advice would you give? And it can be specific to groups of individuals that you feel that are really required, or it could be generalist. So over to you.
Yeah, so I would say probably my advice would be to not get intimidated. Again, as I mentioned earlier, like, you might find market veterans that have been operating in that market for the past 20 years. But really the market, that existed 20 years ago is not the same. So I think that most of the stakeholders currently that are operating in that market are quite new, and new rules are being set up. So, like until the market matures, like everyone has a chance to have like a strong footprint and help shape the market. And I guess just jump in the wagon now while you can have like a big impact. So as I said, not get intimidated. As Louisa mentioned, like a lot of people that are now working in that space are coming from like traditional financial backgrounds, and you probably have like more like crazy career shifts that happened. So yeah,
I always joke that people are always jumping on the bandwagon that I was on for years and years before, but it's I think that it's amazing that this industry is really taking off in such a huge way. And I'm always really excited to hear about people who do want to come and learn more about climate or want to work in climate, anything like that. I constantly get requests from friends, younger cousins who want to start working in climate and want to have a chat. And I really love having those chats with people, because it's so interesting to hear why people want to work in this area, or what their past experience is and what they can be doing. I think advice number one would be just always reach out to people if you hear about anything interesting. There are probably so many jobs that you didn't even know existed. So there's plenty of things to look at and plenty of places that you can get involved in, even if you don't think that your experience is relevant. And then I think another piece of advice would be to not think that anything's going to stay still for any amount of time. This, is a hugely quickly moving industry. And I think just try and stay as informed as you can, but don't worry if things pass you by, because there's probably something else coming up. So it's really exciting to be a part of this.
Fantastic. Well, I think you both sold the dream of working in the carbon space. So thank you very much. It's certainly, from my perspective, you're in an amazing space, and what BeZero Carbon are doing is so needed to get other parts of the sector working together. So thank you for your hard work. Thanks for telling your stories today. And for joining us. And I'm excited to see how many jobs that you both have within the same company in the next year, and catch up on what's happening. So thanks for joining, ladies.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jenny, for having us. Very nice to have this chat.
Really enjoyed it.